They thought she was just a shy woman with no skill until the piano revealed the secret she had quietly carried for years. The small community center on Maple Street was a quiet place most days. It had a few rooms for art classes, a library corner, and a cozy little hall used for different events. One of the most popular weekly events there was the beginner piano class. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm and friendly. Anyone who wanted to learn the piano, no matter how young or old, was welcome to join. The instructors were kind, but they liked to push their students to try hard. One Wednesday morning, a new woman walked in. She didn't look like someone who would draw attention. She wore a long gray sweater, simple trousers, and old shoes that looked very comfortable, but not stylish. Her hair was tied back in a low bun, and she carried a small leather notebook in her hands. Her name was Clara. She didn't speak loudly when she introduced herself to the receptionist. Her voice was soft, almost like a whisper, and her eyes looked gentle but thoughtful, as if she had lived through many quiet years. When Clara stepped into the music room for the first time, she smiled politely at everyone and quietly took a seat at the back. There were about 15 other students, most of them younger than her. Some were teenagers, some were in their 20s or 30s, and a few were older adults trying something new after retirement. They all noticed Clara, but no one thought much about her. She looked calm and very ordinary. Nobody could guess what kind of story was hidden behind her eyes. As the weeks passed, Clara became a familiar face in the class. She never missed a session. She always arrived a few minutes early, found the same chair at the back, and listened carefully. She took notes while the teachers spoke about finger positions, posture, scales, and rhythms. Sometimes the instructors asked the students to come up and try playing a few simple notes. The beginners often fumbled and made mistakes, and everyone laughed together in good spirit. But every time someone asked Clara if she wanted to try, she would shake her head gently and say, "Maybe next time." She said it with such politeness that no one could push her further. The teachers, especially the younger assistant named Mark, began to wonder if Clara was shy or afraid of playing. Mark once joked in front of the class, "Clara is hiding her secret talent from us. I bet she's a hidden genius." Everyone laughed, including Clara, but she just smiled and looked down at her notebook. Some of the other students became curious about her. One young woman, Tara, who was studying music in college, tried talking to her during break. "Have you ever played before?" she asked kindly. Clara replied, "Yes, a little long ago." Tara asked, "Why don't you play now?" Clara smiled and said, "I'm just enjoying watching others. It's peaceful." That was all she said. No one could figure her out. She never showed off, never corrected anyone, and never spoke about her past. She clapped for every student, even when they hit the wrong keys or forgot a note. She was always kind, always quiet. Meanwhile, the other students were slowly improving. Some could now play simple songs with 2 hands. Others were still learning. To read music, the teachers were patient but firm. They expected effort. Mark, especially, had a habit of pushing people to get out of their comfort zones. He believed that growth only came with challenge. One afternoon, after a particularly messy practice where several students failed to complete a small exercise, Mark turned to Clara and said, "All right, Clara, today is your day. Come up and try. This piece, it's simple." Clara looked surprised but not nervous. She smiled and said, "Not today, Mark. I need a bit more time." Mark sighed. "You've been coming for 6 weeks and haven't touched the piano once." Clara simply replied, "I enjoy learning in my own way." That answer left Mark puzzled. He couldn't understand what she meant. Why would someone come to a piano class just to sit and watch? In truth, Clara had a reason, one she never shared. Music had once been her entire world. As a child, she had been drawn to the piano like a bird drawn to the wind. Her fingers had found the keys naturally. Her heart had found rhythm and melody in every corner of life. She trained for years, traveled to competitions, won awards, and played in grand concert halls. But all of that belonged to a life she had carefully placed behind her. There had been love in that life, to a husband who supported her music, who clapped the loudest at every show. But when he died in a sudden car accident, Clara had closed the lid of her piano and locked it for good. The music hurt too much. It reminded her of everything she had lost. For many years, she had not touched a single note. Until one day, while walking past the community center, she saw a small flyer pinned to the gate. Piano classes for all ages, beginners welcome. She didn't know why she stopped. She didn't know why she walked inside and signed up. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was time. So now she sat at the back of the room every week, watching people take their first musical steps. She smiled when they made mistakes and celebrated when they improved. She remembered her own journey years ago when she had been just as uncertain. She found peace in their joy, and it slowly warmed her frozen heart. But the teachers didn't understand. They were starting to feel she was wasting their time. One afternoon, the head instructor, Mr. Grayson, who was usually very patient, said during a staff meeting, "She's not a beginner." "I don't believe it. No one takes notes like that unless they know what they're doing." Mark nodded. "I think she's hiding something, but why?" Grayson shrugged. "Maybe she's just scared. Or maybe she needs a little encouragement." Next week, something unexpected happened. After the class had tried a challenging new piece and failed to get it right, Mr. Grayson looked directly at Clara and said, "How about this, Clara? I want you to try this piece next week. It's Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. It's hard, but maybe you'll surprise us." The whole class gasped. That piece was not for beginners. It was complex, heavy, and emotionally powerful. Demanded fast fingers and a deep connection with music. Even the more advanced students had only heard it played by professionals. Clara looked at Mr. Grayson calmly. There was no fear in her eyes, just silence. She nodded once. The students around her began whispering. Why would he ask her to play that? She's never played a single note. Maybe he's just trying to make her quit. Even Tara looked shocked. That's a bit cruel, she whispered to her friend. But Clara didn't look upset. She packed her notebook, smiled at the teachers, and left quietly. No one could understand her reaction. Was she actually going to try it, or was she just too polite to say no? That night, Clara went home and opened the old drawer in her living room. Inside was a small velvet box. She took it out slowly and opened it. Inside was a pendant with the letter M, her husband's initial. Next to it was a folded piece of music, Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor. Her fingers touched the old paper gently. She walked over to her piano, silent for more than 10 years, and stood on. She sat down. For the first time in years, her fingers touched the keys. The sound that filled the room was like a breath held too long. It was sorrow. It was love. It was memory. It was healing. She practiced all night, back at the community center. The students and teachers talked about her. She won't do it. She can't do it. She'll never show up. But they didn't know Clara. They didn't know the fire that still lived quietly inside her. They didn't know the pain she had buried beneath her calm smile. And they certainly didn't know that she had once played on stages far grander than this. She had nothing to prove to anyone. She wasn't trying to impress or win. To find herself again. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready. What happened next would change the way everyone in that little room saw her forever. The next class was unusually quiet. There was a strange sense of curiosity floating in the air. Most of the students had heard about what had happened last week. Some were unsure if Clara would even come back. Others whispered that Mr. Grayson had gone too far. A few believed it was just a harmless joke to get her to finally participate. But deep down, no one really expected her to try playing that difficult piece. It was too much. Even Mark, who loved pushing people, thought perhaps the challenge had been a little harsh. The Rachmaninoff piece was no ordinary song. It was powerful, dramatic, full of emotion and speed. It was not meant for beginners. It needed both strength and sensitivity. Not just skill, but also experience. Only someone who understood the heart of music could play it well. That's why everyone was so surprised when Clara nodded so calmly the week before. She hadn't argued, she hadn't laughed or looked scared. She just nodded as the students settled into their chairs. The room filled with quiet chatter, Mr. Grayson and Mark set up the sheet music and tuned the classroom piano. The same questions kept circling among the students. Was Clara really going to play today? Would she actually try that impossible piece? Or would she pretend to be sick and stay home? But at exactly 9 a.m., the door opened, and Clara walked. And she looked the same as always: simple sweater, low bun, soft expression. She carried her notebook, but there was something different in her eyes today. A quiet strength, like a person who had made a decision and was completely at peace with it. She smiled at the group and went straight to her usual seat at the back. The class grew silent as they watched her. Mark gave a small nod of greeting. Mr. Grayson looked up, his eyes surprised but unreadable. Clara sat down gently and opened her notebook. She didn't look nervous. She didn't seem angry or excited. She just looked calm. After a few minutes of warm-up exercises and simple student performances, Mr. Grayson cleared his throat. "Before we end today's session," he said, "we have a special request. Last week, we asked Clara to try playing Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor." Everyone turned to look at her. "We understand it's a very challenging piece," he continued, "and it's okay if she has changed her mind." Clara stood up. Slowly, she closed her notebook, walked toward the piano without saying a word, and sat down on the bench. No one moved. No one even blinked. The room was so silent, it felt like the walls were holding their breath. Clara placed her hands gently on the keys. Her fingers rested for a few seconds, and then she began to play at first. The sound was soft, like a whisper of thunder far away. Then the first powerful chords shook the air. Her fingers moved with unbelievable confidence and speed. The notes rushed out like waves crashing against a cliff, deep, dark, and full of emotion. Then suddenly it shifted, light, quick. Delicate melodies danced across the keys like raindrops on glass. Her posture was perfect. Her expression never changed, but her music spoke louder than any words. Every single note carried meaning. Every pause, every rise and fall of sound told a story. She wasn't just playing notes, she was breathing life into them. The room was frozen. No one could believe what they were witnessing. Mark stood with his mouth slightly open. Tara's eyes were wide with disbelief. Even Mr. Grayson, the tough and experienced teacher, seemed unable to speak. Clara's hands flew over the keys with a kind of grace that couldn't be taught in a few weeks or even years. This was not the playing of a hobbyist. This was the touch of a master. The music continued to rise and fall like a storm passing through mountains. It was full of sadness, strength, and something else, something deeper. There was pain in it. There was memory. There was love. Finally, as the last notes drifted into silence, Clara lifted her hands from the keys and let them rest on her lap. She didn't look up. She just sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then she stood up quietly and walked back to her seat. The room remained frozen for several seconds. Then slowly, one person began to clap, then another and another. Soon the room exploded in applause. Some clapped with wide eyes, some with tears, and others with stunned admiration. Mr. Grayson walked up to her with a look of complete shock and respect. "Clara," he said softly, "where did you learn to play like that?" Clara smiled gently and said, "A long time ago." Mark stepped forward. "You've been letting us think you were a beginner. Why didn't you tell us?" Hyman answered with a voice that held no anger, no pride, only truth. "Because I came here not to teach or perform. I came here to feel music again." That sentence touched something inside everyone. They began to understand. This was not a woman showing off. This was someone who had carried a deep connection with music, who had once lived in its light, and who had returned not for fame, but for healing. After class, students surrounded her with questions. "Were you a concert pianist?" "I did." "You study in Europe? Why did you stop playing?" But Clara just smiled and said, "Another time." Mark, still shocked, said quietly, "You played it better than anyone I've ever seen in person." Clara looked at him kindly. "Thank you. But the piece doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every ear that hears it, and every heart that feels it. That night, word about what happened spread through the entire community center. Even people from the art classes and book club began to talk about the quiet lady who played like magic. Some people thought it was an urban legend. Others didn't believe someone so modest could have that much talent. But the ones who had seen it, with their own eyes, knew the truth, and they would never forget it. Mr. Grayson sat alone in the staff office that evening, still thinking about it. He had taught for over 20 years. He had seen all kinds of students, talented, lazy, hardworking, and hopeless. But he had never seen anything like Clara. Her skill was one thing, but her silence, her humility, her reasons, they were what truly amazed him. He realized how quickly people judge others based on appearance or silence. He had almost given up on her as a student. And yet, she had more to teach than any book or lecture. At home, Clara sat at her old piano again. She looked at the photo of her husband on the nearby shelf. A tear rolled down her cheek, but it wasn't from pain. It was from peace. She had played again. She had shared her heart without fear. That night, she wrote in her notebook, "Music is not always for performance. Sometimes it's for remembering. Sometimes it's for healing. And sometimes it's simply for being alive again." She closed the book and smiled. She didn't know what the next class would bring. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of it. She had played again, and the world had listened. The morning after Clara's unforgettable performance, the community center seemed different. It was the same building with the same white walls and music posters, but there was a new energy in the air. Students whispered excitedly as they arrived, early, hoping to catch another glimpse of what they had seen the week before. Some even brought their friends with them, saying, "You won't believe what she did unless you see it yourself." For years, the piano class had been a gentle learning space, a slow-moving path for beginners to explore music. But now, everything had changed. Clara had brought something into that room that had been missing: wonder. The students were no longer just curious about the piano, they were inspired. They had seen what music could truly become in the hands of someone who loved it deeply. Clara arrived as usual, dressed simply, with her notebook in hand. She smiled at the receptionist and made her way to the music room. When she entered, the students looked at her differently. Their eyes were wide with respect, even awe. A few clapped softly when she walked in. Clara gave a small, warm nod in return. She didn't like attention, but she accepted it kindly. She sat at her usual chair in the back corner. It was as if nothing had changed for her, though everything had changed for the others. Tara, who used to think of Clara as just a quiet lady, now looked at her like a mystery waiting to be solved. Even Mark, the assistant teacher who once thought Clara wasn't trying hard enough, avoided making eye contact. He was embarrassed and humbled. Mr. Grayson, who had challenged her to play the impossible piece, now looked at Clara like she was a guest of honor. After a few minutes, Mr. Grayson spoke. "Before we begin today's lesson, I want to take a moment to thank Clara. What she shared with us last week was more than music, it was a gift." Everyone clapped again, this time louder and with more meaning. Clara gave a small bow, her eyes kind but modest. She never acted proud, never boasted. If anything, she looked like she was hoping people would stop talking about it so they could go back to practicing. The class continued with a few simple exercises, and Clara remained quiet. But this time, when the students played, they tried harder. They sat straighter. They pressed the keys with more care. It was clear that Clara's performance had touched something inside them. They weren't just learning anymore, they were. Reaching, Tara tried a short melody and missed 2 notes. She paused, looked nervous, and then turned to Clara. "Do you have any advice?" she asked softly. Clara smiled and said, "Breathe before you begin. Let the silence guide your hands." It was such a simple suggestion, yet it felt deep. Tara tried again. This time, she played the melody more slowly. It wasn't perfect, but it was better, smoother, more thoughtful. Tara looked surprised. "It worked," she whispered slowly. More students began asking Clara small questions about rhythm, hand movement, even emotion. Clara answered each. one with patience and kindness. She never made anyone feel small, even when correcting them. Her words were soft, but they carried weight. After the session, Mr. Grayson approached her. "You know," he said, "I think you've taught more in one morning than I have in a month." Clara laughed gently. "I'm only sharing what I've learned from others. But your experience," he said, "it's rare. Would you consider helping us more? Maybe co-teach?" Clara's face changed. She looked thoughtful, even hesitant. "Not sure I'm ready for that," she said slowly. "I came here to find something I lost, not to become a teacher again." Mr. Grayson nodded, respecting her honesty. "Then just stay. Be with us. Play when you feel like it.
I might speak when you want."
You've already brought something special here." Clara nodded and smiled. As the weeks passed, Clara became a quiet guide for the entire class. She never took the teacher's seat, but her presence was powerful. Students started coming early just to speak with her. She would sit next to them and gently point out where their fingers could move more freely or where their timing could improve. She would hum softly to help them hear the rhythm. She even lent her old sheet music to those who wanted to try harder pieces. People started calling her Miss Clara, not out of age but out of respect. Even Mark, who used to be frustrated with her silence, now watched her with admiration. He said once during a staff meeting, "She teaches without teaching. The students follow her because she doesn't demand anything." Outside the music room, others began to hear about her. A woman from the choir class asked if Clara would help her with her singing timing. An older man from the painting group asked if she would play background music during their next exhibit. Clara always smiled and said, "If it helps, I will." No one really knew who she was, not yet. They knew she was brilliant, but they didn't know her story. That part was still a mystery. One rainy afternoon, after the class had ended, Clara stayed behind to help Tara with a piece. They sat side by side at the piano bench. Tara asked, "You must have played in big places before." "You're too good." Clara hesitated. She looked out the window at the soft drizzle. After a moment, she said, "I used to play in concert halls. Yes, when I was younger." "Why did you stop?" Tara asked gently. Clara was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Because life sometimes takes things away, and it takes time to find your way back." Tara didn't ask more. She could feel that the answer came from a place of deep emotion. She placed her hand on Clara's and said, "I'm glad you came back." Clara looked at her and smiled, a real smile, one that carried both pain and peace. That night, the piano room remained empty after everyone had left. But for a few moments, the center's janitor stood outside, listening. Inside, Clara played against something soft, something gentle, like a lullaby. It wasn't for anyone else, it was just for herself. Music, once her burden, had become her comfort again. One Saturday morning, the community center held a small event. Each class was asked to present something they had learned. The painting class showed their artwork. The dance group performed a short routine. The piano class was asked to play a group piece. Mr. Grayson asked Clara if she would play the final solo. She hesitated. "Please," he said, "not for performance, just for sharing." Clara thought about it, then nodded. That evening, the small hall filled with parents, friends, and curious visitors. The piano students played first. Their group piece was simple but sweet. Everyone clapped. Then Mr. Grayson walked to the microphone. "We have one more performance," he said, "by someone who reminds us that music is not just about sound, it's about soul." Clara walked to the piano. She wore a soft blue scarf that had belonged to her late husband. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. The piece she chose was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was peaceful, gentle, and full of quiet emotion. As she played, people leaned forward. Some closed their eyes. Others held their breath. There were no loud notes, no dramatic moves. Just music that felt like being hugged by memory. When she finished, there was a long, deep silence. Then, a wave of applause, slow, rising, heartfelt. Clara stood, bowed slightly, and left the stage, In the crowd, a woman turned to her friend and whispered, "She doesn't just play the piano. She is the piano." From that night on, Clara became more than just the quiet lady at the back of the room. She became the soul of the class. Her presence made others believe they could reach further, feel deeper, and express more. She never spoke about her past on stage. She never bragged. But piece by piece, through small actions, people understood the truth, that greatness does not always speak loudly. Sometimes it sits quietly, listens deeply, and plays softly until the whole room falls silent just to hear it breathe. The day after Clara performed at the community center event, something started to shift. It was not loud or sudden. It was quiet, like the way morning sunlight slips into a dark room without asking. But it changed everything Clara had become. More than just a respected student in the piano class, she had become a mystery people wanted to understand. Her performance had touched hearts. Now many wanted to know the story behind her music. People started talking about her outside the music room. Some said she must have been famous once. Others believed she had studied under a great teacher. If you thought she was a retired concert pianist, but no one knew for sure. Clara never mentioned her past. She always answered questions with a gentle smile and changed the topic. Mr. Grayson, who had watched her from the beginning, felt a deep sense of curiosity. He had seen many musicians in his life, but Clara was different. Her playing came from a place far deeper than skill or practice. It carried emotion that could not be explained with music theory. One afternoon, after class had ended, Mr. Grayson invited Clara to sit with him in the empty music room. She agreed quietly and sat across from him. He offered her a cup of tea, and she accepted with a soft thank you. They talked for a few minutes about music, about the students, about how well the class was progressing. But then, after a small pause, Mr. Grayson looked into her eyes and asked gently, "Clara, may I ask you something personal?" She looked at him calmly, of course. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked. "Where did you learn to put so much feeling into every note?" Clara looked down at her tea for a moment, and she spoke slowly. "I started learning piano when I was 6. My grandmother had an old upright piano in her living room. I used to sit on a small cushion. To reach the keys, I couldn't even read music, but I loved the sound. I used to play simple melodies by ear." Mr. Grayson listened without interrupting. "My parents saw I had talent," she continued, "so they saved up to send me to lessons. Then when I was 13, I got into a music school. After that, everything moved fast. Competitions, recitals, travel." He raised his eyebrows slightly. "You were a professional concert pianist?" She nodded. "Yes, I was, for a long time." Mr. Grayson sat back in his chair, trying to hide his amazement. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Clara looked out. The window at the trees swaying in the wind. "Because that life ended a long time ago. I don't live there anymore." He didn't speak. He waited. Clara's voice became quieter. "I stopped playing after my husband died. He was my biggest supporter. He traveled with me, helped with rehearsals, encouraged me when I doubted myself. He was everything." A sadness filled her eyes, but her face remained calm. "We were driving home from a concert one night. It was raining. The car skidded off. The road, I survived. He didn't." Mr. Grayson lowered his eyes. I couldn't touch the piano after that, she said. Every note reminded me of him, of what I lost. I packed away my music. I sold my concert dresses. And I disappeared. From the stage. She took a sip of tea and let the silence sit for a while. I moved to a small town, started working at a library. I stopped being Clara Bennett, the pianist. I just became Clara. Quiet, invisible Clara, and for years that was enough. Until one day, I walked past this community center and saw a flyer for beginner piano lessons. Stood there staring at it for a long time. I don't know why. Something inside me whispered, "Go in," so I did. Mr. Grayson nodded slowly. "You came back to music." "Yes," she said, "but not to perform, not to be famous again, just to feel it. Just to remember who I was before everything fell apart." He looked at her with deep respect. "You've given our students more than you know," she smiled gently. "They've given me something too. They reminded me that music doesn't belong to the past. It lives wherever it's played with honesty." That evening, Mr. Grayson shared part of Clara's story with the staff, but only what she allowed. He told them about her past as a concert pianist, her loss, and how she had found her way back to music. Everyone listened with quiet reverence. Suddenly, all the little things Clara had done, her kindness, her patience, her silence, made sense. Word spread quietly through the students too. Tara, who had grown close to Clara, explained gently to others that Clara had once been a great performer, but had left music behind after a personal tragedy. The students didn't gossip or make a big deal out of it. Instead, they showed her even more respect. They began to treat her not just as a talented pianist, but as someone who had carried pain and still found the courage to return to what she loved. Over time, Clara began opening up more. She started offering small group sessions after class. Students would gather around her and she would explain how to bring emotion into their playing. She told them how music is not only about getting the notes right, but about telling a story. She showed them how to listen, not just to their own fingers, but to the silence between the notes. She never charged money. She never asked for recognition. She just helped because she wanted to. The atmosphere in the class changed. Students began practicing more at home. They asked deeper questions. They tried harder not because they wanted grades, but because they wanted to reach that place Clara had shown them, a place where music speaks without words. Mark, who had once doubted Clara, became one of her biggest admirers. He started asking her for help with lesson plans. He often asked, "How would you explain this to a student who's stuck?" Clara always gave thoughtful answers. She had a way of making complicated things sound simple. One day, Mark asked her, "Why don't you teach full-time again?" "You're a natural." Clara smiled. "Because I don't need to. This is enough." Mr. Grayson soon asked her to join the music center as a mentor. "Not a teacher," he said, "just a guiding star." She agreed on one condition: no titles, no stage, just the piano. The center printed a small flyer announcing an informal mentorship program with Clara. They called it Moments with Miss Clara. Students were invited to sign up for short, one-on-one or small group sessions. The demand was so high that the list filled up in days. Clara now had a new rhythm in her life. She still arrived early, still sat at the back sometimes, still wore her simple clothes. But now she also stayed late, guiding students, sharing techniques, listening to their fears, and encouraging them with quiet strength. One evening, Tara stayed behind after a session. She had been practicing a chop-in piece and was feeling frustrated. "Just can't get the left hand smooth," she said. "I feel like I'm fighting with the piano." Clara sat beside her. "Close your eyes," she said. "Now breathe. Forget the fingers. Listen to the rhythm in your chest." Tara followed her instructions and played again. Her hands moved more naturally, and the melody flowed better. When she finished, Clara smiled. "See? You're not fighting the piano. You're dancing with it." Tara laughed and hugged her. "Thank you." Clara held her gently and whispered, "I'm proud of you." These small moments became treasures for the students. They didn't just become better pianists, they became better at listening, at feeling, at expressing. Music, through Clara, had become a language of the heart. One Sunday, during a quiet afternoon, Clara sat alone in the music room. The sun poured through the windows, and dust danced in the golden light. She opened her notebook and began writing. She wrote about her journey, from the little girl on a cushion at her grandmother's piano to the grand stages of Europe, to the lonely years after her husband's death, and finally to this little community center where she found herself again. She wrote, "Music is not only sound. It is memory, pain, joy, silence, and hope. I lost it once, but it waited for me, and when I was ready, it welcomed me home." She closed the notebook, placed it gently on the piano, and began to play a soft tune of her own, one she hadn't written down, one that came from her soul. No one was there to listen, but she smiled, because for the first time in many years, she didn't need an audience. She only needed the music. The days passed peacefully at the community center, but the music room had quietly become the heart of the entire building. Students from other departments often peeked into the piano class, curious about the woman who had once been silent and now seemed to hold the attention of everyone around her. Clara didn't dress differently. She didn't speak more loudly. She hadn't changed her appearance or personality, but somehow the air around her felt different. There was quiet strength in her every movement and kindness in every word she spoke. The students now called her Miss Clara with love, not formality. It had started as a nickname, but it grew into something more respectful. To them, she was a teacher, a mentor, and something else, something like a quiet hero. Clara had not returned to the big concert stages. She had no interest in lights, applause, or fame. She did not post videos online or tell people about her past. But her presence alone had changed the piano class forever. People practiced harder, listened deeper, and learned faster. And it wasn't just the music that had improved. It was the way the students carried themselves with more care, more patience, and more confidence. One Monday morning, a new student arrived. He was a tall man in his 50s, with broad shoulders and nervous eyes. His name was Raj. He had never played the piano before, but had recently retired from his job and wanted to try something new. When he saw Clara, he recognized her face from somewhere, though he couldn't remember exactly where. During break time, he walked up to her and said, "Excuse me, were you ever a professional pianist?" Clara smiled softly and replied, "Long time ago." He looked at her thoughtfully. "I saw you perform in Berlin once, about 20 years ago. It was magical."
Allies.
Clara didn't look surprised. She simply nodded and said, "Thank you for remembering. But why are you here?" Raj asked, looking around the small classroom. Clara paused and said, "Because sometimes music sounds better in quiet places." He nodded, understanding. More than her words said, as more people like Raj joined the class, Clara's reputation quietly grew. But even then, she never became proud or distant. She treated beginners with the same respect she gave to advanced students. She believed that everyone had music inside them, and her job was only to help them find it. The center began organizing monthly open music days, where students could perform short pieces for friends and family. These were casual, friendly events, not competitions. Clara never volunteered to perform, but students always requested her to play at the end. She would always smile politely and say, "Only if there's time." There was always time. And every time she played, something beautiful happened. People in the audience, mothers holding children, teenagers looking down at their phones, old men leaning on canes would stop, listen, and go quiet. Her music was not loud. It didn't have flashing fingers or dramatic flair, but it reached people's hearts. It told them stories they didn't know they needed to hear. One evening, after an open music day, a young boy named Amir ran up to her and said, "Miss Clara, when you play, I feel like I'm flying." She bent down to his height and smiled. "That's because the piano has wings." He laughed and asked, "Can you teach me how to fly like that?" She nodded, one note at a time. The center soon added a special wall near the music room. It was called Moments of Music. Students could pin notes, drawings, or photos about how music had touched their lives. The wall slowly filled with colorful pieces. Some were simple thank you notes, others were drawings of pianos or music notes, and some were long letters sharing personal journeys. Many of these messages mentioned Clara. One note read, "Before I met Miss Clara, I thought music was just something smart people did. Now I know it's something anyone can feel." Another said, "She taught me how to be brave even in silence." Clara never commented on the wall. But sometimes, when no one was watching, she would stop and read the notes with soft eyes and a quiet smile. As months passed, Clara's rhythm with the center became a steady part of her life. She walked to class every morning, helped students in the afternoon, and spent evenings practicing in the quiet piano room. Her own music had changed. It was softer, gentler, but deeper than ever. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just speaking through the piano honestly, tenderly, fully. But even beautiful rhythms can be broken by surprise. One day, a letter arrived at the center addressed to Clara Bennett. It had a golden seal and the logo of the European Music Foundation. It was an invitation to a special tribute concert for legendary pianists who had influenced generations. They wanted Clara to perform. They had finally found out where she had gone, and they were reaching out. Mr. Grayson gave her the envelope. "You don't have to do anything," he said, "but I thought you should see this." Clara held the envelope for a long moment. She didn't open it right away. She simply said, "Thank you," and placed it inside her notebook. For days, she didn't speak about it. She continued teaching, helping, and playing like always. But Tara, who had become like family to her, noticed something different. "Are you okay?" Tara asked one afternoon. Clara looked thoughtful. "I'm just remembering things," she said. Eventually, she opened the letter. It was a warm, respectful invitation, offering to fly her to Vienna, pay for her stay, and give her the closing performance. The event would be attended by world-famous musicians, media, and old friends from the music world. For one moment, Clara felt the old world calling her back. The stage lights, the grand halls, the long applause. Classroom. She saw Tara helping a young student, Mark correcting someone's hand position, and a new boy nervously trying his first scale. And she knew where she belonged. She wrote a letter back, "Thank you for the honor, but I have already returned to the only stage I need. I perform for people who play with their hearts. That is enough for me." She signed it simply, Clara Mister. Grayson read the letter and smiled. "You are exactly where you're meant to be," he said. One cold December day, the power went out at the center. It was cloudy and the heaters weren't working. The director decided to cancel all classes for the day. Most students packed up and left, but Clara stayed. She sat in the dim light of the music room, her hands gently touching the cold keys. Tara, Mark, and a few students stayed too. They lit candles around the piano. There was no electricity, no warmth, no microphones. But Clara began to play, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. She played an old lullaby her grandmother used to sing. The students gathered around her, holding candles and listening. Some hummed along, others closed their eyes. It was the purest form of music. No noise, no rush, just feeling. After the piece ended, no one clapped. They just sat there in silence, breathing together in the dark, warmed only by the music and each other. Later, Tara whispered, "You brought us all here. Without you, this class would just be a lesson. Now, it's something else, something we carry in our hearts." Clara looked at her eyes, shining softly. "Music is a home we carry with us," she said. "Sometimes we find others who live there too." By spring, the center decided to rename the music room. They called it the Clara Room. Clara tried to object, but the students insisted. They painted a small sign with musical notes in her name and hung it above the door. Clara stood in front of it one day and touched it gently. She thought of her younger self, running across European stages in high heels and glittering dresses. She thought of her husband, clapping in the front row, smiling with pride. Oh, of the accident, the silence, the long years without music. And then she thought of this little classroom, the smiling students, the shaky first songs, the candlelight performances, and the hugs that followed every mistake. Yes, this was her greatest stage. Clara never became famous again, But her music traveled further than ever carried in the hearts of the people she touched. In the end, Clara taught everyone one unforgettable truth. You don't need a spotlight to shine. You don't need applause to be heard. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes the most beautiful music is played quietly, in a small room, with people who listen.